It's really great to be with all of you this morning. For those of you I don't know, I'm Lindsay Gleason, and I started at the Community Foundation back in this April. So just a few months here for me as our assistant director. And part of my work is working on the Third Thursday workshops. So we are recording today's session, just so you're aware. And please feel free to keep your camera on or off, whatever your preference is. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Folks can see my screen okay? Great, thanks. Just always like to check because I've done that before and people couldn't see it. So thank you so much for joining today. As you know, we're talking about corporate sponsorships today, and we're excited to share a bit of our knowledge here at the foundation and talk with one of our corporate partners. So you'll be hearing from Jess Wergo, who I'm sure most of you know is the CEO of the foundation, and myself. And then we have a special guest here today with us, Jason Hardy, who has been a great partner of the foundation, who works at Carter Bank and Trust. So we'll hear a little bit from the corporate perspective too. Before we dive into the content, I have a few things that I wanted to share with you about what's coming up. This particular call will post the recording in PowerPoint on our website, on our resources page, but I'll also email out everyone who registered a link to the recording when it's ready, in case you want to go back to these resources. And please save the date for our next Third Thursday session. It will be in person. This year, we've been doing quarterly in-person meetings and everything else on Zoom. This next in-person meeting will be on August 18th. And all of the in-person sessions this year have been leadership focused. So we're really excited in August on the 18th from 9 to 11 a.m., so a bit longer than normal. We're going to be partnering with the Christiansburg Institute on grassroots leadership. So they're going to be doing kind of a basic 101 session, and we're really looking forward to hearing from their expertise and hope you all can join us. There's going to be an optional tour of the CI following the session. And so all of this will be in Christiansburg. We'll be at the Mockingbird Cafe on the second floor, which is also known as the Blue Room in that great event space. So really looking forward to that. Please be on the lookout for registration for that coming soon. And then last reminder, our responsive grant application at the foundation is due tomorrow at 5 p.m. And I know a number of folks on the call are working on those applications. So please give us a call or email us, but probably a call would be a bit faster, and let us know if you're having any issues and we can assist you. So looking forward to reading those applications.
Lindsay, may I ask a question real quick?
Of course.
About the in-person meetings that are leadership focused. I have wondered before if I could bring some of my coworkers who are not necessarily leaders by organizational chart spot, but are leaders in the organization, the community, to those. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for that question, Laura. And so I think I think I speak for both Jess and I. When I think about leaders in the community, I don't think it necessarily has to be positional. I think everyone is welcome. Everyone has that kind of leadership capacity. And so everyone is welcome at these types of sessions.
Thank you so much. I assumed that would be the answer, but I just wanted to check.
Yeah, thanks for checking. We'd be glad to have anyone from your team join us. So thank you. So just a few meeting reminders. If you could keep your mic muted when you're not speaking. I know we've been doing this for more than 2 years, but I've certainly kept my mic off by accident before, but just be mindful of that. And when folks are speaking, if you want to use the chat to ask a question, we can pause at the end of each section to answer those questions. And then at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. And then you're welcome to unmute, raise your hand, put your question in the chat. You may have noticed that we have subtitles available today. So those are automatically generated, and that's an accessibility measure for Zoom that's helpful for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing. And they're pretty good captions, but you will notice some mistakes because they're automatically generated. But they're also helpful if someone's in a loud space or can't have their volume on for some reason. So just a suggestion, if you have future meetings, it's a helpful tool. And then, as I said before, we all have a lot going on, so please keep your video on, off, whatever you prefer. We're just glad that you're here. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Jess.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Lindsay and Jason, for kind of joining in this morning on the presentation. And so we're going to talk through, as Lindsay said, corporate sponsorships and share some experiences that we've had at the foundation and best practices that we know of. It's not meant to be sort of the end all be all, but just some good general best practices and things to think about as you're looking to find corporate sponsors for your events or programs. So go ahead and move forward for me, Lindsay. So first, I thought we would talk a little bit through how do you even start identifying who a corporate prospect for your organization could be. So there's tons of wonderful businesses in our community, both local businesses and branches of larger scale businesses who support community organizations, but how do you know where to start? So the first thing to do is just to kind of look around you and who is part of your network already. So as nonprofits, we all are kind of businesses in and of ourselves, and we have different partners that we work with to carry out our business. So what existing relationships do you have? You might imagine the Community Foundation has a lot of partnerships with banks because a large part of what we do is money management. So banks are some key partners for us, not only in carrying out our business, but in being sponsors for our events. Businesses will often be more likely to sponsor if you are a client of theirs and you are working with them in some way where you've developed that business relationship. So think about who you work with already that you have a relationship with that might be interested in supporting you further. And then also looking at your board and volunteers. So look around at those folks who are already committed to your mission. These are your early adopters, the folks who understand you well and are going to want to support you because they've already shown that with their time and maybe their personal resources. These are great folks to be able to be sponsors and may well be good at being larger scale sponsors for you, as well as helping you to secure some other sponsors. All right, go ahead again, Lindsay. So beyond those that are right around you as part of your network, kind of the next layer out to think about as you're looking at corporate sponsors is alignment with your mission. So are there types of businesses out there that really fit well with your mission? So if you're a bookstore, you may be interested in promoting literacy. Local builders may be interested in supporting groups like Habitat for Humanity, for example. In what ways are they aligned with your mission? Or even how could the work that you do make their business more successful? So for example, sometimes health-related organizations will support health programs because they know ultimately it makes their job easier if folks are healthier and not always using some of their resources at a hospital or a doctor's office, for example. So think about where there's alignment, because that's going to make the case easier to make to a corporate sponsor. And then the other thing to do is just to do some good reconnaissance in the community around you. So who are those corporations that you see their logos everywhere, right? They are community minded already, and particularly those that may sponsor organizations or events that are similar to what you do. Now, you may think that's counterintuitive. They already do somebody else's organization. Why would they want to do mine? But they may well be very interested in your mission and already have a place in their heart for that mission because you've seen that they are supporting other organizations that are similar, or maybe they like to support certain kinds of events. So take some time just to look around you and see what other organizations are doing and whether or not those might be businesses that want to sponsor in addition to what they're already doing, what you're doing. Move ahead, please, Lindsay. So once you've started thinking about who your corporate sponsors could be, then before you sort of do any particular outreach, it's important to understand what their process may be. So some businesses in the area may have an application process. We see this particularly where there might be a branch of a larger bank or business that has a footprint beyond just the New River Valley. So some of those larger scale businesses, I know many of us have applied to Wells Fargo for support, for example, they have an application process. So think about what that application process may be, but also understand if they do have an application process, is there some sort of local review for that process? So maybe it all runs up through their larger corporate structure, but there are local folks that have a say in how those decisions are made. And that will help you to understand what you need to put in or who you might want to develop a relationship with. Also think about the timing. So what's the fiscal year of the business that you might be working with? And when do they typically do their budgets? A lot of times businesses will do sponsorships out of some sort of marketing budget, for example, or they just are setting a sponsorship budget overall for the year. So as you develop relationships with prospects, ask when do they typically do this and when do they need information about the event or program you want sponsored in order to make a timely decision. And then the other thing that for us has come up even more often in the last couple of years is, are there limitations on the kinds of things that they can support? So for example, during COVID, we had a few of our corporate sponsors who would ask, okay, are you asking us to sponsor an in-person event? Because they were not comfortable during COVID based on their own corporate guidelines of being part of any sort of in-person event themselves or sponsoring that event. So are there any sorts of limitations? Do they not sponsor something if there's alcohol involved, for example? You never know, what the limitations might be for a particular business. So think about that. Sometimes that information might be available if they have an application process. Other times that might be a question that you're going to ask a particular prospect as you're starting to develop the relationship. All right, move on ahead, Lindsay. So you've kind of identified who these prospects could be. You've gotten some good information about how they do what they do. And now you want to start developing a relationship with that business. Sometimes you have more time to develop a relationship long-term, and we'll talk about that. And other times you're going to need to make an ask quickly because you're developing sponsorships for an upcoming event. So first and foremost, leverage the network that you have. So you may not have an individual relationship with this corporate sponsor, but the New River Valley is overall a small community, and it's likely that somebody does have a relationship with that business. We've also found at the foundation that this is a great way to engage our board members in fundraising, because oftentimes board members or volunteers will say, I'm no good at fundraising, I can't help with anything. But making a phone call and helping to set up a meeting is pretty low-hanging fruit when it comes to fundraising, and is something that they can do, which can be really helpful. So if you're looking at that prospect, talk to your board, volunteers, or staff about who may have an existing relationship with that person, because that warm contact, as we call it, is going to work a lot better than just cold calling. Then you want to think about, all right, what do you want to be able to communicate with the prospect? Are you going to have an in-person meeting or Zoom, or provide them with some information? And then think about, okay, if you do that, and maybe your board member is with you, what do you want to say? What kind of case do you want to make? And who is making that case for you? So again, we have found sometimes as we're making asks when we have an in-person meeting, that our board member who may have made the contact typically starts off by talking about why they're involved with the Community Foundation to begin with, what they like about the particular event or program for which we're seeking a sponsor, because it becomes sort of a peer-to-peer discussion with that corporate person. We're just all talking as people about what we love about the foundation, the event, the program. And then sometimes our staff member will come in and talk more about the specifics of the sponsorship levels, et cetera, once that relationship's been established. So be thinking about, just like you would for any other donor interaction, what are the key points you want to make, and how do you leverage the relationships that may already be in place to make the most of that conversation. All right, next slide. The other thing you can do, particularly if you have a little bit more time to develop a relationship before you're making an ask, is to really think through how do you cultivate a long-term relationship. So we often think of approaching corporate folks because we want a sponsorship, but honestly, it's nice just to start by inviting them to know a little bit more about you, by asking them to come to an event with no expectation that there's going to be a sponsorship. Just, we want to introduce you to what our organization does. Join us at this particular event. And particularly if, sometimes depending on, what your bottom line is for an event and whether you need it to be a fundraiser, you can also offer complimentary tickets to folks just as a way to entice them to come and to help them understand that you really want to develop that relationship over time. You might also ask them to be a volunteer, to join your mailing list. These are all ways just to start to develop a relationship without that expectation that you're going to make an ask right away, because hopefully over time, as you develop the relationship, it's going to be a lot easier to ask. And oftentimes we found with some corporate sponsors, as the relationship develops, they'll come to us and say, is there something that we can support that you do? And then finally, another thing to do is just attend other events that organizations do to build your network of potential supporters, but to learn from one another. And I don't mean that to say, stealing sponsors away from others. I don't really think that's how our sponsors look at things. Many of the corporate sponsors we're all approaching are very generous with both their time and their money, and they're sponsoring a lot of different great organizations. But it's helpful to build relationships by attending those events, and also just to see the great work that our other peer nonprofits are doing. How are they recognizing their volunteers? In what ways are they utilizing the logo or other marketing materials to make the most of that corporate sponsorship? It's just great to be able to look at what other folks are doing over time. All right, I think I got one more, Lindsay. Okay, so you've developed a relationship, you know exactly what's needed, you're about to make that ask for your corporate sponsor. So depending on how they do that, a few things to think about, particularly if you have at least a meeting with a local contact. If you are meeting, make sure you know how much time you have and stick to that, because all of these folks are very busy, just like all of us are. So use the time that you have wisely if you are in an in-person or a Zoom meeting. Know what your sponsorship options and benefits are, and Lindsay's going to talk through that in much more detail next. Take some time to listen to what your prospect is looking for. So they may ask questions of you, or you'd invite them to provide feedback on what kind of recognition do they want. What are they particularly interested in? Do they need to have more of a social media footprint? And so they want to really emphasize recognition via social media, or would they prefer to have their logo on more materials that folks are taking with them? Are they trying to attract a certain type of client at their business that your organization has a relationship with? So take some time in conversation, not just to sell what your levels are, but also to hear from them about what they're looking for and how you can help them in that process. Make sure you're clear about the deadline for a decision, because we all know that we need to get logos on materials printed, et cetera, by a certain timeline. So it's good to be clear about when you need that decision to be made. And you want to check in as they're making the decision. It's always a little difficult to figure out how often do you check in before they give you a decision, because you don't want to be too overbearing, but I think it's helpful just to say, hey, we need this information to make the most of your sponsorship. And then finally, as you're moving through the process, it's helpful to understand what the corporate sponsor may need. So in some cases, they can just, cut a check without a problem at all. Other times they'll need an invoice. They may need more information about your organization. They may need a W-9 form. Whatever that is that they may need, make sure that you have that on hand and that you're responding quickly with that information once they say yes, because that's helpful just to make sure they're doing everything they need to do on their end to get you paid, and that you're making it as easy as possible for them to support your work. So I think that's the end of my section. Any quick questions before we go into Lindsay's discussion of kind of options, benefits, etc.? All right, I'll pass it back to you, Lindsay.
All right, thanks, Jess. So as Jess just mentioned, I'm going to be talking about building those sponsorship levels. And I think, it certainly depends on the organization when you're thinking about levels. And you probably know what I mean, but just thinking about at $500, we'd offer X and Y. $1,000 XYZ, and those amounts may differ based on what you the types of sponsorships that you think you might be able to get, or and what you'd be able to offer to a sponsor as well. So these would all be structured just a little bit differently depending on each nonprofit. But I wanted to talk to you about how to think about where to start when creating that list of what you could potentially offer to folks. If I could advance the slide, there it is. Okay. So when thinking about what to offer, I think it's important to be realistic, flexible, and consistent. And one of our major opportunities for sponsorships at the foundation is our Give Local NRV Giving Day, which I know a number of you participated in. And we had a lot of corporate sponsors come in at different levels this year for that. I think we ended up having 10 different businesses involved and sponsor us. And so some of those folks were people that we've been involved with for a really long time. Some are newer partners. And so when thinking about what to offer a sponsor, when I say be realistic, make sure that you're not over-promising. I know that most of us have limited time and capacity. A lot of folks providing direct services are doing those direct services, and many of you on the call wear many hats at your organization. So really think about what you have time for, and make sure you're not overstretching yourself by over-promising something. Make sure to be flexible. So just like what Jess said, make sure to have that conversation with your potential sponsor about what would interest them. Are they looking for more social media, more of a social media footprint? Would a spotlight in your annual report interest them? So come with a list of your ideas and also be prepared to listen to their ideas. But kind of with any situation with a donor, listening to their ideas and stopping to think, can we do that? And if you don't feel like something's doable, let them know and say, but we can't do A, but can we try B, and work on that kind of compromise and see what they say. So I think it's really important to have that conversation. And then be consistent. I would imagine many folks over the years, if you don't have that solidified list of the different levels, you've probably done it maybe a little bit differently with each partner. And I think that's completely fine. But if you're looking to maybe be a bit more structured in what you offered, I think it's great to offer those same benefits to sponsors at the same giving level. But there could always be folks that you've been working with for a long time, that have been longtime partners, that you might want to offer a little bit more to. So I think aiming to be consistent, but there might be exceptions, and I think that's fine. So when thinking about what you could offer and you're developing those options, this is very similar to what Jess said of looking around you. So list your current marketing items. What are you already doing? I think it's wonderful to ideate and brainstorm and think big, and maybe put all the think big ideas on one sheet of paper, and then on another sheet of paper, list what you're currently doing, because there's so much that you could potentially leverage that's not adding a tremendous amount of work to you and your staff. And I feel like probably any sponsor and business who's interested in giving back to the community, they don't want to create extra work for you either, right? They want to make sure that you're both getting something out of it, but they're involved in this kind of work because they care about our community. So adding a bunch to your plate is probably not something they're interested in either. So think about what you're currently doing. And so these are just a few things that you could potentially consider. So think about your online presence. Look at your website. Are there places where you could potentially put a logo? Putting a logo higher up on a page might be an option for a higher level sponsor. Putting a logo lower on a page, your home page, or a separate page, that could be for a lower level sponsor. So you could think about even the placement on your website. Think about your social media. Are there some posts that you want to do, particularly highlighting a sponsor? Could you use your cover photos to add a logo for a certain period of time? And then think about, could you create graphics for your sponsor that they could use on their website and their social media to show that they're involved in giving back to the community? Think about any media outreach you might do. So are you already doing press releases? Do you already have partnerships with TV stations who want to know more about your work? And could you write a press release talking specifically about a specific sponsor if they're at that higher level? Or if you're writing a press release, an example of something we did for Give Local, we had a number of press releases go out about that, but we asked one of our corporate sponsors from Brad DiNardo, who is the president of the National Bank of Blacksburg, if he wanted to contribute a quote. And then their media team ended up putting it on the NBB social media. And so it was that reciprocal, we were doing something and then they wanted to promote it as well. But how can you incorporate folks into that media outreach that you're already doing? Email. Do you already have an email list, whether it's something formal through MailChimp or Constant Contact, or something where you're sending through Outlook? Is there an opportunity to thank your sponsor in a specific email that you're sending out, or in one of your regular newsletters? So there's lots of opportunities there. You could potentially have a logo in the email, or just a list of sponsors at the end, whatever you think would be compelling to your sponsor. And again, thinking about asking them what might interest them. Physical mail. So this might be, if you're working on an event, putting a blurb in an annual report isn't something you're going to probably do during that event period, but that might be a nice recognition for the following year when you're working on your annual report, to recognize your sponsors or highlight a particular sponsor and share their impact on the community. Do you send out solicitation letters? Is there an opportunity to maybe mention that in something, or some kind of newsletter that you might send out? So again, what are you already doing? Do you have any swag? So do you have t-shirts for any events that you're working on? Stickers? Would someone like, if you're already reprinting that kind of thing, or you already do it for an event, would a sponsor like their name or logo on it? Signage. So do you have posters advertising for your event, or flyers, or just advertising for you and the work that you do? At an event, could you, if it's a big enough sponsor, could you name the event after them in some way? So an example for us, Give Local, sponsored by X organization, right? And that could be in all of your marketing, or on your signage if it's a gathering. So there's a lot of things that you're already doing, and I think that's your most important list of things to think about. And then going over to that other list of other ideas, look at the other idea list of things you're not doing, and think about, what could you realistically add? What is something that maybe is not that hard to do? Maybe you don't consistently send out your e-newsletter, but you have a great list of folks that you email sporadically, and maybe you want to start sending out a quarterly newsletter, and something simple where you could write up a quick note to folks on updates and talk about your sponsors. And but the thing is, that list of add-ons, if there's nothing that you feel like you could realistically add on, I think that's okay. Just remember that you have that core list of things that you're already doing. And also ask and make sure you let your sponsor know of, this is what we can realistically do. And if they have other ideas, see what they might be able to help you with. Sometimes folks have media people that might want to partner with writing a press release, for example. So I think that there's a lot that you could do to share those resources and talk together about. And so again, considering with each option of that list that you generate, whatever it is, what benefit might be appealing to a sponsor? Where can you add their name or logo to different pieces of content? So when you're building those levels of thinking about, okay, this is what we'd offer at the $500 level, $1,000 and so forth, I think that there's different ways to order levels and think about what you would offer. So I think one approach is thinking about the audience reach. Say you have an email list of 5,000 people. And one of your benefits that you're going to offer at the lowest level is just a mention of all of your sponsors at the end of an email. But maybe at a higher level, you'd have a dedicated email that's much more showcasing a particular sponsor. You include their logo and so forth. So thinking about what your different media or what the audience reaches and what might be beneficial. So if you don't get a ton of reach on your Facebook posts, but a lot on your Instagram posts, maybe Facebook posts is lower on the list and Instagram is higher. You don't necessarily have to parse it out that way, but I think it's good to think about your typical reach and where you might want to place that on your sponsor list. Then the other thing to consider, of course, is the resource needed. So if you don't have a communications person in-house, maybe writing a press release is time consuming. So that might be something that you put at a higher level just because you know it's going to take more time than you normally put into something versus, of course, social media always takes time and effort, but writing a shorter social media post versus a longer story, different level of resources, right? And thinking about any money that you might want to spend or technical expertise. And when thinking about money spent, I think that's stuff that you would already be doing. So I would imagine that not adding on a bunch more things and spending money on that is not something that a corporate sponsor would be looking for. I think that they want to know that their money is benefiting the community and maybe not going toward marketing pieces, but if you're already doing something. But there's and thinking about the cost, any technical expertise is I think really important when you're thinking about where to place something on your sponsorship levels. And then lastly, this is emphasizing what Jess said earlier. I think when you're trying to maintain that relationship, making sure that you're doing regular updates. Maybe you have an event when you think about the Give Local timeline, for example, that's something that does happen. The Giving Day happens once a year, but there's so much time that goes into preparing for that, right? And so say you secure a sponsorship, say we secure a sponsorship in the fall in October, but the event isn't till June. We wouldn't want to go from October to June without checking in with our partners. So think about sharing regular updates and making sure to invite folks to other events and hear updates on your work, just like Jess said. And continuing that regular content that's not just about soliciting additional funds. And I think once an event or if your fiscal year is over, follow up with your sponsor on how things went. What was your impact? Share a little bit about your work. Share about the media reach that you had with some of your outreach or some metrics on the number of people who came to your website or whatever it is that relates to those sponsorship levels to show the impact. So that's the end of my section, and I'd be glad to field any questions before we talk with Jason Hardy a little bit. So if folks have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat or to unmute. All right, so if y'all want to keep thinking, we'll transition to talking to Jason. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Jason, if you just want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how Carter Bank and Trust approaches partnerships with nonprofits, that would be great.
Sure, happy to do that. Can y'all hear me okay? Everything good? Great, thank you. I do want to, I'll do the whole introduction thing in just a second. I do want to say thank you to Lindsay and Jess and also all of you guys. You know, nonprofits in a community. I've lived several places, and I've learned that you can kind of judge the health of a community by the strength of its nonprofits. And I think we live in a place where nonprofits really lead the way not just helping people, but also supporting business and supporting economic growth as well. So I want to say thank you to all of you for all the hard work that you do. It's very appreciated. I'm Jason Hardy. I've been the market executive here for Carter Bank. I grew up here, went to Blacksburg High School, went away to college, moved down to Raleigh for about 20 years and came back about 5 years ago to head up business development efforts for Carter Bank here in the area, and love being back. Married my high school sweetheart, so I was the bad guy for moving her away and the good guy for moving her back. So we're very happy to be here raising our two boys and our little dog, I guess. But yeah, I part of what I do is in developing business for the bank here is manage our overall reach into the community and our support. And we do look at it, if you didn't write down everything that Jess and Lindsay said, you missed out, because I think they really hit the vast majority of the high points. But what we look for in terms of how we support is really, I can kind of sum it up in two ways. We give time and we give money. And a lot of that, I think, stems from a bunch of different factors. I think, money is sometimes it's easy to write a check. Sometimes it's easy to go out and kind of tag on with an event and encourage our associates to go out there and actually be visible in the community. And I think there's significant benefit to the bank for doing both. So we don't really put one above the other. And I think that's important for you guys to know, is that we want to be involved. We don't want to just write a check and not have a seat at the table or have an opportunity to be on site volunteering. We preach relationships in all of the business development that we do. So why should that be any different with our corporate partnerships and sponsorships? I think Jess brought up about having targeted conversations and having the pitch, right? You want to go out there and pitch potential sponsors and get them to believe in what you're doing, and that belief comes in the form of a monetary or a time donation. I've had good pitches to me and I've had bad pitches to me before, and the bad ones tend to stick out a little more, unfortunately, than the good ones. So I'll kind of run down a bad one that I had, probably the one that sticks out the most in my head, just real quick. This was down in North Carolina, so it's nobody locally here. But I'd gone through a leadership program with I guess a membership or some sort of director for a nonprofit, and it was already a nonprofit that our bank contributed to, but on a fairly low scale, more on the time, heavy on the time and low on the money. And so she wanted to kind of flip that and have us be kind of a major sponsor to the tune of several tens of thousands of dollars, which for the bank that we worked for, that I worked for at the time, was a lot of money, like a lot of money. So this was a major thing. And so she called me up, which is great. We were on a very friendly, personal basis. She called me up and said, "Hey, can we grab lunch and let me talk to you about this?" And absolutely. So we sat down. I could tell she was nervous right away. I knew this was going to kind of be a big deal, and that's fine. Everybody's nervous, and that's no problem. We shot the breeze for a little bit first, and then finally moved into the business part. And once she got into the business part, this is kind of where everything went a little south. She did all the talking, and that was very evident. It was much more her talking at me than it was a mutually conversive conversation. Didn't want to know what our thoughts were about her organization, because again, we had a pretty good relationship already. Just really wanted to focus on pitching this idea that the group had that she was to deliver to me. And so that was a little bit down-putting, off-putting. Just really, it wasn't a conversation. It was a one-way speech. Other little things, at the end, after all that, after an hour and probably 20 minutes of listening to her talk, then she kind of, I guess body language would say, can you pay for this lunch? that kind of ended it. It was, she didn't reach out and grab the check when it came. She kind of, looked at it, looked at me, and, body language was like that. We kind of sat there with an awkward silence for maybe, it seemed like 3 minutes, but it was probably 20 seconds. But either way, I mean, just little behaviors like that. It told me that she wasn't completely prepared to have a conversation with me about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, because, lunch was $25 or $20 or whatever. So just little things. And I think if the initial part of the conversation had gone a little bit better, then the finale there with the check might not have been a big deal. But, I only bring that up just to say the little details matter. And, it's something to, if you're going to go out and pitch anything, be prepared and understand, just basic, I think, business decorum. But anyway, the better pitches I've had before really focus on relationship and really focus on how can you as a partner, how can we support you and therefore have you support us? And I've had several of those here in the New River Valley, and I think that's why the bank is as supportive as we are of nonprofits in the area. Let me say this too. I'm only speaking from the Carter Bank perspective. All banks, I'm sure, go through similar thought processes. So I say Carter Bank because that's who signs my paycheck, but think generally here as opposed to specifically. I guess the last thing I'll talk about, and Jess, I think, hit on this as well, is that schedule, the budget schedule. I don't know how other banks do it. I expect they do it the same way we do. I do have an annual budget that we'll start working on here in the next month or two. And it's like Christmas. It comes earlier and earlier every year, right? You never know exactly when it's going to happen, but we're having conversations now about our 2023 sponsorship year. So as you're presenting to folks, as you're making asks, think about that. Think about what are you asking 2 weeks before an event happens, which is very easy for me to say no to, or are you asking, look, we've got an event next spring, we've got an event next fall, we've got an ongoing program that we'd like you to be a part of. How about it? Let's talk about that. Which I guess kind of brings my final thing that I'll say before I answer questions is, what are you looking for in terms of sponsorship? Are you looking for an ongoing partner? Are you looking for a single event type partnership that we come in and pay money to and maybe show up at the event and help out that way? Or is this an annual thing that you'd like us to be a part of? And I'll be honest, we love the annual thing a lot more than we like just the one hit. Again, it goes back to that relationship piece. We really want to support you guys, and we want to tout our relationship with you guys just as much as you want to tout your relationship with us, if that makes sense. It definitely needs to be a two-way street, and we're gonna put a lot of emphasis on that as we announce our partnership. So hopefully that was fairly concise. I definitely hit the high points. If there's any questions that you guys have, I'll be as frank as you need me to be.
Thank you, Jason. That was really great. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I've only been part of the foundation since April, and it was fun to dive right into Give Local and have that contact with our sponsors. But it just, everyone that I've spoken to with one of our corporate sponsors has just showed how much they care about the community, and just appreciate when I emailed you that you wanted to come on here, when we had an event right before Giving Day. I know you were out of town for that, but other folks from Carter Bank and Trust came, and it's nice to see people out in the community and to network a little bit, to hear about the work that nonprofits are doing. And so it's just it's always exciting to have those conversations with folks. So if folks have questions, we'd be glad to field those. Again, feel free to unmute and ask, or if you want to add them in the chat, I'm happy to read them off. And while you're thinking about those, if folks have comments to share about things that have worked for them in the past, that would be great to hear, or anything like that would be great. So please feel free to share.
Hi, can I share something?
Hi, Ashley. It's good to meet you. I've heard your name a lot.
Good to be here. So I just wanted to pop on real quick. When I saw corporate sponsorships, I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to join. So I have a really long career in fundraising, mostly on the corporate side. So I've written proposals starting at $100, and just last week I wrote one for $5 million. And so I think what's important to note is that when talking to our corporate sponsors, to look at them holistically. The sponsorship piece is just one aspect of their giving. If you have any type of event that you can engage their employees in so that their employees can fundraise for you as well, that's another opportunity, back to that employee engagement piece. Also, if they have an opportunity to do like a point of sale or point of purchase, so think about going to like a grocery store and them asking, can you round up, or would you like to add $1 on? Like if you're working with a partner that has that type of opportunity to employee giving, to any type of like in-kind or credits that corporations can give as well. And to Jason's point of time, like holistically, just looking at those corporate relationships as truly a partnership and not just them stroking a check. There's so many different ways that corporations can benefit organizations. And I think when you approach it holistically, you have much higher success. So I just thought I would add that tidbit in.
Thanks, Ashley. That's a great way to put it. I appreciate that word holistically. And you're right, thinking about all those different types of ideas in kind and or technical expertise that folks have, or advising that they might want to be involved in if you have a question or an issue. There's so many different ways to partner, and I think the way you figure out those different ways to partner is by asking those questions and having those good conversations, and maybe not having an hour and 20-minute monologue like Jason described. But absolutely, thank you for sharing that. For other folks on the call who've had success with sponsorships, are there other tips that you feel like we didn't address that you'd want to share with folks?
I'll just add in something, Lindsay. Jason, hearing your bad example was, I think, as helpful as hearing good ones. But I wanted to underscore, like you said, that the little things really matter. And so sometimes I think as nonprofits are thinking like, gosh, do we have to, pay for lunch or something? This is where your board members come in really handy, right? So this is an easy way. If you feel like you don't have a budget to do something nice, like pick up the check, it's not that those things are always expected, but it is nice. And when you're using somebody's time to ask them for tens of thousands of dollars, then you want to you want to at least offer, for example, or that kind of thing. And so I find if you don't have a budget for that as an organization, this is where you can really utilize your board members to help you with those kinds of things, and plan that out in advance. So, I'm going to say, okay, so-and-so, we're going to go meet with Jason, and would you be okay with picking up the check? Or, or I'll say the foundation has a budget for this. We're going to go ahead and pick up the check for it. Or having, materials with you. So I've found as well that, that it's all fine and good to have the conversation, but then, the decision may not be made for another couple weeks while they're looking at their budget, and they may not remember all of the specifics. So have a folder of materials that is, examples of the kinds of things that their logo would be on, the sponsorship levels with the deadline that it needs to be there, who the contact is, all those things that easier you can make it for your sponsor or donor of any kind to contribute, the better that's going to be. And so having something that they can take with them that looks professional and nice that they can just have is really helpful as well. It's like, as Jason said, those little things matter, and they demonstrate how the investment in you is a good investment for them, right? This is a strong organization that I feel as a corporate sponsor I can invest in, and it's going to make me look good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just emphasize what you said about having materials. I think it's a great idea to have for sure the sponsorship levels and then examples of things that logos can go on. And if you have a one pager about your organization, every fundraiser I've ever worked with loves the phrase one pager, but it's so nice to have something concise to share with a potential donor because folks are busy. And you want something that will talk about your overall work and the impact that you have. And, you know, when you think about the number of meetings we all have each day and throughout the week, having something to, that with your contact information, make sure you give them your business card, but having something for folks to take away, I think is really important. And be prompt with follow-up. I think it's always nice to send a short thank you email. And maybe you all talked about a few things that you wanted to send them in additional information about. Make sure you send that as soon as you can. I think that matters for sure.
So let me say one more little thing real quick, because I think both of y'all hit on a great thing. And it's really board utilization. How many of you, I'm assuming all of you have boards. How many of you utilize your board members on a regular basis? You know, I'm on several boards, and I don't think about it as often as I should. But if an EO comes to me and says, "Hey, Jason, I need your help, or I would like your help in, you know, asking XYZ company for $1,000 annual sponsorship, or, you know, need to recruit a new board member, you know, can we go to lunch?" And there's no way I'm saying no to that. You know, that I'm absolutely going to say yes. Timing might be a challenge. So, you know, scheduling is certainly a thing, and be respectful of your board members' time that way. But most board members who are bought in are not going to say no, and they're going to help you with that. So don't feel like you've got to do that on your own. If Jess were to call me and say, "Hey, can you help me with this customer? And by the way, we're tapped out on our budget. Do you think the bank could handle covering the tab?" Absolutely. You know, that's a no-brainer. So don't be afraid to ask that question. It's worthwhile. And then Lindsay brought up a great point too about follow-up. You know, have a defined follow-up schedule. When you get back from that appointment of asking, send a quick email. It takes 10 seconds to send a, "Hey, really enjoyed lunch today. I hope you'll consider what we talked about. I'll follow up with you again in about 2 weeks if I haven't heard from you." And then make sure you do that. Put it on your calendar and follow up, because one thing that, you know, I'm a stickler for is, and I think a lot of folks in the business world is like this, but don't tell me you're going to do something and then not do it. That's very frustrating. So, you know, you're asking major asks, you know, whether it's $100 or $5 million, like Ashley said. It's in somebody's mind, it's a major ask. So put the effort and the attention behind it, and maybe even, you know, construct a kind of a policy around that, just kind of a procedure that you have in place, that this is how we do it. And it may not be how everybody does it, but, you know, this is how my organization is going to do it. So I think that would be beneficial.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. Laura, please.
Yeah. Do we have time for another question?
Of course.
So I just was curious, maybe from your perspective, Jason, or whoever, I was in a situation, not in this organization or in this area, where I was approaching a sponsor for an annual sponsorship. I was very new to this. And they said, "We'd be happy to sponsor your event annually, but we want to be the only business of our industry on your sponsorship list." And I said, "Ooh, I don't know if I can promise that." And they said, "Well, then we want to always be the highest." And in my mind, I was like, "Well, then pick the highest level." But I didn't say that. So I'm curious about that thought, right, Jessica? I'm curious about that thought process, or how we should navigate that. Like, that puts me in a really weird situation. And I don't know how to, any thoughts or.
Yeah, do me go first, Jess? Lindsay? Okay. Yes, that's an interesting perspective and interesting predicament to be in, I think. And I think I'll wear my banker hat and my nonprofit hat at the same time on this one. It'll look funny, but I'll do it anyway. That's I think a legitimate point that sponsor is making, depending on the type of event and type of community that you live in. And I don't know where that was, and you don't have to tell me, but to be the kind of the keystone sponsor in a certain industry, I don't think I've seen it as much recently as I did maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But that, that's a defensive mechanism on their point, right? They're trying to kind of make sure that nobody else can be at that level or any level, I guess, in that industry, which puts you guys in an awkward position. I mean, that's certainly not something I hope that you answered right away. It's that's definitely something to go back and talk to your board about and say, is this something we want to do? Do we want to, forsake all other potential for sponsorship out of that industry to lock these folks in? And maybe the board wants to do that. That's entirely possible. But I think that needs to be a board decision as to whether or not you do that. Benefits are, it's a sure thing, and absolutely yes, a $1,500 sponsorship in my mind goes up significantly to be the only one, because again, you are forsaking the whole pool of potential sponsors out there. The problem is what if they don't deliver on their end? You've locked in and they don't deliver on their end, and they may write the check every year but never show up, and maybe you need them to show up, and all different types of variables there. You really, I think, if they're going to be the sole sponsor in an industry, I think a lot of conversation has to happen around that sponsorship, and expectations really need to be set up front as to how that sponsorship and how that partnership goes moving forward.
And I'll just add into that too, is really interesting example, Orbeth, and I was in something somewhat similar not all that long ago, and I think the relationship here really matters. So we've had a sponsor that literally reaches out to us every year to say, hey, do you want us to do this? And it's a significant sponsorship. And as we were thinking about it for 23, we were thinking about raising the level, and we were going back and forth about can this particular sponsor handle a slightly larger ask, or can we combine them with somebody else? And what became clear over the course of a very friendly relationship with the sponsor is that, yeah, we could combine their sponsorship with somebody else's to get to the level that we wanted, but they wouldn't love that. Like, it was clear, yeah, that, and so that relationship is really key. And so I just came back and I was like, you know what, we're good. Like, we're going to keep you here. We can handle this. We're going to figure out a different way to get to where we wanted to be with something else. So I think, and it was all just because the relationship was really important. And while he said, yeah, sure, I can understand that, I think that was code for, yeah, we wouldn't love if that happened, which was perfectly understandable. And somebody who's provided such great support for us, it was a no-brainer to say, okay, I think we can make this work. So I think, sort of being thoughtful about how critical is that relationship, and like Jason said, what level are they at? Because I think it's perfectly reasonable to go back and say, okay, you can be the sole sponsor, but it's got the minimum amount has got to be here, because we are then forsaking all these other possible sponsors at that level. So that's a tricky one.
That's really helpful. Thank you both.
Thanks for sharing that example, Laura Beth. So folks, I know we're at 10, so just want to be respectful of your time. Really appreciate you taking the hour out of your day to listen to us and to think about corporate sponsors with us. And thanks again to Jason. We really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your expertise. So it's great to see all of you. And as always, if you have questions or ideas for future Third Thursday sessions, please let us know. We're here to put on things that are interesting to you and that would benefit you. So take care, everyone. Have a great day.